On today's episode, we find out that taxes are the price we pay for living in a society. Learn that having to work 8 hours a day is a problem. Unravel the mystery behind the velocity of money. Uncover that the reason the CDC has failed to contain monkeypox is because it is underfunded. And finally, we bust another minimum wage myth. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we take on and find the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds. And we point out kind of where they went wrong, point out where they could go right, and try to have a little bit of a laugh along the way. Before we get started, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It always helps us out, and we love to hear from you in our DMs or in the comments. And if you are listening to the show on Apple, or Spotify or any of those places, and you want to see these cringe posts, you can go to cringepost.com and check out the visual show companion there. Before we poke fun at other people, we always like to poke fun at ourselves. And today we get to take a trip into my co-host Donnie's old Tumblr. And he has a post here that's titled Profanity. Why do people feel the need to cuss? It's quite unbecoming, uncultured, and unintelligent. I wish that people, instead of mindlessly thrashing out at one another with swear words, would spar with words in a creative yet pointed manner. For instance, where someone might shout, F you, they should instead lash out, go and eat a maggot's nest, you slimy pair of thrown out gym socks. Nerd.
I know. Like, this gives me like clever Redditor energy. Oh my gosh, I hate it. It's so up my own butt. Like, come on.
Like, this kind of stuff would be like, if you said this in real life, right? If you didn't say it on Tumblr, but you said it in real life, you would get bullied for it. And you would not know. It would like help reinforce your position, right? But you would not know that you're being insufferable, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, even in the second line there, the unbecoming, uncultured, and unintelligent. If that wasn't pretentious enough, and just, I mean, I'm such a d-bag, but it's obviously arrogant and self-aggrandizing, but also I'm trying to be clever with, the linking and an alliteration and all that. And I just, oh my gosh, it's so insufferable. I can't stand it.
And you're almost like the reason you and I both don't necessarily like swearing or don't practice that in our daily lives. But like the reason the reason I dislike swearing the most is because someone's usually trying to portray a version of themselves in a really strong way that's not necessarily representative of them, or that they can't necessarily articulate. Like it's got some like shock value that they want to like put onto themselves and take that onto themselves. And what's ironic about this is you're doing that same thing, right? You're trying to be like, oh, look at me, the intellectual, up on the pedestal, exactly, and taking that on. So you're guilty of the thing that makes swearing not that awesome.
Definitely. Well, and the funny thing is this doesn't have any point of argumentation. This is just me saying what I wish people would do. Who cares? Who cares what Donnie wants the world to do? There's no point to it. I don't give a reason. I don't give, if it would be one thing if I was making the point that, I don't like it when people take the Lord's name in vain. If you're a Christian and you're doing that thing, there's a commandment to not do that. His name comes with power, and using it in a frivolous way is demeaning to that power, stuff like that. But I don't even have that fully formed of a worldview at that point as to know why I don't like swearing, and to recognize that profanity can be used in certain contexts where the gravity of the word is important. And many cases it's rude or it's repugnant or it will come across in a bad way, and that is not an impression you want to give. But at the core of it, you don't want to use words in vain. That's kind of the idea. Yeah. But I don't have that argumentation here, right? I'm just saying.
I mean, you say go eat maggots, you slimy pair of gym socks. Like, that's not much better.
I'm reinforcing people to say mean things to each other. I'm just saying, just don't use these particular words. And again, I don't justify why. I'm just telling you my preference is this.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we were talking about this before the show, but I remember you and your brother very much anti-swear in college. I was never pro-swear, but I've known to drop one every now and then. I always thought, wow, like you guys, I think maybe it was more your brother wore it as a badge of honor that like he'd never sworn up until that point. I'm sure maybe that's changed as life goes on, but
I think he's still F-word free.
He's still pure. Wow,
I think so.
That's awesome.
So.
Good for you, David.
I think that's all I've got on that one.
And he did it. He did it with all the pretension that you
I know,
you,
which
you
is
put out
crazy
there.
to think about.
So
yeah,
he is of pure heart, truly.
He had to put up with a lot.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to other people's stuff. We've got a post in a Reddit called "The Right Can't Meme," and it's a picture of a meme, and it says "Fixed it." And the original post would read like this: if the government was a person, and they've got a person saying, "Hey, I'm so tired. I worked 60 hours last week," and then the government person says, "That's so crazy. So where's my cut?" A pretty accurate take, I'd say. But this post tries to fix it, and they say, instead of "That's so crazy. Where's my cut?" they say, how I gave you all those things like roads, water, education, etc. Reckon you could pay me for those things? Like you agreed to when you agreed to live in a society. So this harkens back to we live in a society 2.0.
Yeah.
The first time I saw this, it's like, like, to the normal layperson that's just kind of browsing through things, they'd be like, oh, like that makes tons of sense. We pay taxes, and if we're reaping the benefits of those services and all these different things, like what's so wrong with that? And the what's wrong with it is that you have no choice to pay those taxes. It's the same thing as if my grandmother in the Philippines owned a restaurant, and the mafia came up and said, "Hey, this is a really nice restaurant. We see you have a lot of people coming in here. It could be really dangerous for you. If you don't have protection, so you better pay us 20% of everything you make, or else some things might go bad." And so she, played the game and paid them the money, and nothing went bad. But if she didn't pay them, right, like they wouldn't have protection, and anything could happen to them. And that's essentially what is happening, right? When there's no in a good and just relationship, you can opt out of anything that you want to and say, "Hey, I don't want to pay for that anymore." And that's the big difference between between the liberty world that we envision, which is like, yeah, like I want to have a road, let me pay for it and choose to pay for it. And if I don't pay for it, I don't get to use the road, right? Or if I don't opt into whatever set of conditions of the person that built the road, I don't get to use it. Whereas the government says, hey, you get to use this road, and you will like using it, and you will pay us, or we'll shoot you.
Yeah,
that's how it goes.
Well, and the other thing too is this assumption and reliance that these things by default should be provided and are best provided and distributed by the government is baked into this. It's the common assumption that even the most rural conservative public school is going to instill into someone, which is the funny thing about it. So when this person edits the original meme to instead of having the government say, "So where's my cut?" to sort of expand that into, "Here's all the services we're providing. How about you pay me back like we agreed?" As you point out, there was no agreement there. But the problem is, really, that is the zoomed in version of the conservative meme there. It really is. This is a Turning Point USA meme. And so, if a lot of their politics is going to be predicated on the assumption that we need a strong, small government that has a strong military and public school system that's just raising them right, just making them say the Pledge of Allegiance, and allowing prayer in schools to be taught by unqualified teachers, things like that. Which so this the lefty here did fix it in a way, in that they kind of point out the inherent contradiction of the conservative position that believes in some form of extortionary taxation for these services that they would argue cannot be otherwise distributed. That's the baseline assumption that so many people have. Whereas you can look at impoverished countries that, they have public schooling, and yet, I'm trying to remember which country it is. Tom Woods had interviewed a guy who talked about this in great detail. It might have even been, I don't know, it was one of the poorest African nations, and they had a public school system, but these parents of these kids who were already impoverished chose to do homeschool type options. They did like co-ops where they would take turns teaching, and there was something like 40% of parents chose to do that in spite, and the outcomes were better. And so you think in a nation where we are one of the wealthiest per capita, and we are one of the biggest global contributors, and there's all of these resources abundant to us, and we have things like access to electricity, whether it's through government services or not. You think that if you can make these things work in nations where the natural resources and the number of economic goods available is low, you absolutely can do it in a rich nation with way more access, and you can scale that. So all of these things, roads, water, education, being sort of posited as these goods that have to be distributed by the government, is just the false assumption that someone who's going to make a meme like this relies on, and ultimately kind of the false assumption that the conservative who made this meme tries to ignore. They just want to talk about what they sort of nebulously call big government, but they don't want to define what makes big government big when it's contributing to something that their pet cause or issue.
Yeah, and that's I was talking with a mutual friend of ours yesterday who's very much on the left, but kind of one of the better lefties, in that he's very anti-war and all this stuff. And we were just joking about how we differ and all these things. And I was like, dude, like, if we didn't have all these wars, like, maybe there might be a little bit of money left over. I still think it's wrong that it was taken, but there might be a little bit of money left over to pay for some of these social programs that you want, right? Like, and I honestly much rather money go there and be wasted there than wasted blowing up other people. The other, so you're totally right there that, like, that's the weakness and errant weakness of a conservative position, is it's not philosophically consistent, right? In that manner. And that's where they get got. Because, like, yeah, if they're going to take the money, like, might as well spend it where hypothetically it's going to be used best. I just believe that the people that use it best are the ones that make it in the first place. And that's why I take so much issue with the first line, which is, how I gave you all those things? It's like, what did you give me? You took my money from me. You spent it on a project that I basically had no say over. The budget that you gave me for the project, for the roads, for the water, for the education, you usually are like 3 or 4x what the budget is that you gave me. It's usually not even as good as you pitched it originally, and then you barely maintain it, and then it's built with actual private people. It's like, what aspect of that did you give to me? It sounds like you took a lot and wasted and squandered it. Like, that's what people don't realize. Like, think about the government as a private company. Think about it as like a plumber in your house. If you have a plumber to come over and you say, hey, I want to install a toilet, and they say, hey, I'll quote you, $1,000 to install this toilet and set up all the plumbing for it and all this stuff. And then, the plumber comes in, and instead of it taking a month, to do this whole bathroom remodel, it takes him 5 years. And he's like, well, it took me 5 years, so I got to charge you $50,000 for it now. And oh, by the way, you can't actually flush it. You've got to, like, take a bucket and scoop everything out and throw it outside. That's the equivalent of how well government does all these different projects. And and then you have to ask yourself the reason why are they so bad at doing these projects is because there's no human action. There's no human incentive tied to how the money is spent. It's all these people that are disconnected from it because they never actually earned it.
And the conservative position to that, if you protested, would say, look, we ended up paying this plumber $50,000 instead of the original agreed upon $1,000. And they'd say, well, he's doing his job. He earned it. We need that. We need plumbing. We need a toilet. That's and
we just need a different plumber.
Well, yeah, and what makes me think about this is shout outs to the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, another think tank, and they posted a TikTok where they pointed out that basically the cops in Hawaii got paid overtime in such a way that was like more than doubling their salary, and then because of the way that the pay happened, it had to get matched into their retirement pensions. So you ended up paying like all this extra money. So paying overtime is one thing, right? Because I guess that's an agreed upon thing. But when the overtime gets matched into the pension, then you're almost, sort of
they made 4 times
the impact,
right?
Yeah,
they made 4 times.
And so they just kind of pointed it out, right? And I think personally I think about that, and it's one, let's even say, you as a citizen voluntarily consented to a police officer's salary. Let's say you consent to, let's pay them $60,000 a year or whatever they're going to be paid, and then plus overtime. I agree to that, and then I agree to the pensions. But you're not agreeing to like the pensions going into the overtime, so that they're taking that money from you without your consent there, even if you presumed the initial thing was consensual. So they're doing that without your consent. But the comments I was seeing, because the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii it's a free market thing. I think they tend to be pretty libertarian, which is awesome. But it means you get a lot of conservative people on there, and I saw all these comments of people saying things like, well, they're doing their job. We need that service. So what's wrong? And this is the problem, right? Where the plumber comes in, takes 5 years, you pay him $50,000, and then you say, hey, we shouldn't be spending that much on a plumber. And the conservative position is, well, if he's earned it, he was working overtime. And it's like, well, we need plumbing. So are you going to seriously cut there? And it's like, no. Even if you think that this is a necessary service, you have to recognize that there is a level of waste that is too big that should be cut. But the problem is they never want to say that because it looks, oh, I'm anti-police now. And it's more expedient to be politically sound and to politically support the cops and the police than to actually be fiscally sound. So the conservative position of we need a small government is never sustainable in the same way that Keynesianism isn't, because you can never actually point to the peak line. You can never say, this is where we need to raise taxes if you're talking about Keynesianism, or if you're a conservative, this is where we need to stop paying the police or the military or whatever, quote unquote, small government includes.
Yeah, that's good. I'll have to go look that up. It reminds me of the firefighter in California that got paid for more hours than there are in a year. It's like that's how public unions work. He
had multiple personality disorder. He had two people working
on it. They had to cover all those people. All right. Speaking of hours worked, our next post comes from a Twitter user, and she tweets, am I the only one that sees a problem with working 8 to 9 hours a day and then going home to having about 4 hours to yourself, which includes getting ready for the next day? This is not life. Then to be married and have kids on top of all that? Wild. No wonder people are depressed and going through it. That's too much to handle. Working 4 to 5 hours a day would be perfectly fine too, even in a field I enjoy. At least I can know a majority of my day/life is still for me and not for the job I work for. If only we could get the world to see that our career is our life, not making money for big corporations. And for this one, man, is just ridiculous. And this person, I did a little bit of background on them. I think they're a college senior, and they're about to learn pretty hard here in a minute that if you don't work, you don't get no bread. Like there's nothing for you to eat. And so working is for you. Right? As she's like, I just want to work for me. It's like, well, yeah, the majority of your life is making sure that you are able to like sustain yourself and house yourself and clothe yourself and feed yourself. And if you don't work, you don't get to do those things. And so harkening it back to our favorite, the desert island with the coconuts, like this is the equivalent of a person, getting on the island and everyone has to get, they consume the equivalent of 5 coconuts a day or whatever it is. Right. And so it's like, there is no good technology. Everyone has to climb a tree, hack the coconuts down, chop them open, and get out the meat, and then cook it or do whatever they're going to do to make it taste good. And like, it takes 10 hours to do that, right? And this person sits on the beach and says, this is so dumb. Like, I don't want to have to work 10 hours. I should be able to work 5 hours. And I don't want to, I don't want to have to work for the coconut tree. I don't want to have to work for coconuts. Like, I just want to live my life. I want to spend it living for me. And then that person, after a few days, decides, oh my gosh, like I'm going to starve to death. And then they start climbing the tree to get the coconuts. And it's like, for all of human history, it used to take a person almost like 16 hours worth of time to make enough and produce enough in equivalent for, to feed and house themselves in a day. That's how long it took them. And the only reason it's gotten better, the only reason we have the 8 to 9 hours that you work in a day is because of technological advances. That is by no means the standard. The normal working day is how much time it takes for you to make the equivalent for your current lifestyle, right? You have to produce the amount of what you take in or a little bit more, or else you're going backwards.
Yeah, and I think this person, they're not totally off the mark in the sense that your priorities in life are not wrong if that's the way you're thinking. I genuinely think that if you are saying that your family and your children, and experiences, if that's the primary focus of your life, I think that you're at the very least you're not consumed by sort of the corporate work, and
Sure.
That's the only thing to life. And I think that's good. But the problem is, they trade their understanding of priorities correctly for the incorrect assumption that the reason that this exists is because of some orchestrated reality by corporations or even by like the government or whatever. As you point out, it's a matter of reality. And frankly, if this person wants to work 4 to 5 hours a day, you absolutely can. It's just called a part-time job, or it's called consulting and getting paid enough in those 4 or 5 hours to sustain yourself. It's really all it is a game, like you said, of making more than you use. And so the assumption of saying working 8 to 9 hours a day. Well, that's under the assumption that you're making an amount that is going to mean that that's how much you make, right? And that's, that's a vast majority of jobs right now, but that's also because the vast majority of people want to live in a way where they get the value of 8 to 9 hours of work, and that's usually the most convenient trade-off. It's not everyone can work like multiple consulting jobs for like 2 hours a day each, and make a sustainable living. Now, if you can do that, that's awesome and that's great. And then if that's your lifestyle, and instead of working 10 consulting jobs, maybe you work 5 and you can sustain yourself, that's awesome. That's your choice. And the beautiful thing is that capitalism and free markets make that more possible than anything else can. Just mandating, like if you made a sort of the 40-hour work week law type thing, then you artificially inhibit things before they're ready to be inhibited, and it's just kind of like how the forced lockdowns forced a lot of businesses to adapt to remote work. And while this was a positive thing for a lot of businesses, there were businesses that were shut down, and you've totally screwed the economy in the process. So it's like, is the outcome of more remote work a good thing that technology, and I would argue free markets, enabled, and that should be taken advantage of? Yes. Did the lockdowns help promote that? Yes. Was it worth it? No. Like the costs of forcing those things ended up screwing over so many businesses that had to close and reopen. I don't remember the stats, but we've quoted them here before. Something like 60% that were closed, failed or on reopen, something like that. That was restaurants specifically. I don't remember, but it was devastating to so many businesses. It's devastating for inflationary reasons and for supply chain issues. And so in the same way, when if you were to take sort of the legislative aim here, which is my guess of this person's kind of solution, it's you might allow some businesses that should offer flexibility in terms of hours worked for people who don't want to earn the salary, and they can live on a smaller footprint. That would be great. And I wish more businesses were flexible with their hours. Some can't be, though. And that's the problem, is when you do legislation, you don't incentivize the ones who can to do it. You force everyone, including the ones who can't do it, to adapt to that. And it's disastrous. And notice that if there was legislation like this, there would be some industries that are exempted. Think about things like grocery stores that need to be open so people can get food. Those would have to stay open. And I'm guessing there would be some sort of exemptions, because the costs of hiring people to cover all those shifts would double their costs, which would make it unsustainable. Same thing with police and with fire departments and things where there are actual needs that don't sleep because of the reality that we're talking about.
Yeah, and this person is the same kind of person that the disconnect between reality and actually moving through life is so big that they get upset at people that decide to, that work 10 hours a day, but live on only, 4 hours a day worth of, sustenance for 10 years, and then they retire early, right? Like they get grumpy at those people because they're like, oh, they must have not earned it. It's like, no, like that's the whole game of reality, right? You whether you live in a communist society or in a capitalist society or anything in between, if you are able to produce more than you take, and you're able to take that difference and invest it or use it in other ways, eventually you might have more stuff stockpiled and saved up and producing things that you don't have to work ever again, right? You have enough to last the remaining 50 years of your life or whatever it's going to be. And that's the whole premise of retirement. That's the whole premise of, investing and taking your capital and giving it to other people that are going to create more and more goods and stuff like that. And so these people with this mindset are destined to be poor, right? Like if they operate in this way, because they don't understand how, inputs and outputs affect their day-to-day life and how to manage that. And most of the time what I see, it's public schoolers that have that, right? They never had any sort of personal finance class ever taught to them. And so it's never put to them in that way. It's like, you got to produce more than you consume. And we've got some other cringe posts about wages and how much people consume and all that stuff. And we'll get to that. But, it kind of, Tom Woods has this episode where he talks about how basically all Americans will occupy the top I think it's like 5% or 1% or whatever it is at some point in their life, because most of the people that occupy that top echelon of wealth are people that are older, right? So it's over time, if you're working 8 hours a day and you're only consuming, 6 hours worth of stuff, then, over time, eventually you have, once you hit 60, you've saved up however many hours of time worth to like go through the rest of your life. And that's all stockpiled, right? And so you're going to be richer than someone that's only been working for a year or 2 years like this person is. And that's why everyone will if you work and you consistently work and don't consume more than you produce, you will eventually occupy the top echelons. You might not do it very fast, but you will at some point.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, we've got a post, and this person writes, "This is actually a real economic concept called the velocity of money. Let's say you get paid $10. You use that $10 to buy lunch from a street vendor. Then the street vendor uses that $10 to take a taxi home. Then the taxi driver uses that $10 to pay his babysitter. Next, the babysitter uses that $10 to buy groceries, etc. That one $10 bill produced $50 of economic value. This is really good for the economy and why it's bad to give rich people more and more money, because all the rich people do is hoard it. They don't stimulate the economy multiple times over with it." Oh my gosh. When I saw this, I could not believe it. I almost texted it to you because I thought it was just so cringe, but I figured we leave it for here. It's like, wow, this magical formula that if you spend money, things are created. Like, I didn't know that. Like, we've unlocked the cheat code for the universe. Like, the only people that the velocity of money benefits is the government that taxes it, because the only thing that's created by money being spent is taxes, right? Like, when you spend that $10, when you get paid that $10, you're taxed, 10, 15, 20% on it. So you really get paid $8. And then you go spend at $8 at the lunch vendor, and he has to charge you 10% for sales tax. And then it's so on and so forth till eventually, that money is no longer, the whole value of it has been extracted into the government. What this person fundamentally doesn't understand is that money is it's just a way to exchange value, right? Like, it's not creating anything when you do that. You didn't create, like let's say the street vendor had, like, let's say $1 is worth one taco, right? Like, just by spending $10 over and over and over, you don't just create 10 tacos each time that happens. You have to have 10 tacos initially for that $10 to exist in the first place. And that $10 being transferred is just so that you don't have to figure out the ratio of tacos to miles driven as a taxi driver, or ratios of tacos to, the babysitter hours or anything like that. So that's what money is. It's just a method of exchange, so that way you don't have to think too hard about it. And we've seen this, right now with all the inflation going on, with the redefinition of recession coming up here on Thursday. It's like the more money you print, the less buying power it has, because the actual amount of stuff that has been produced is not increased. The only way things get cheaper is if there is more of that stuff. Because then, there's more for everyone to go around, and people don't have to trade as much to get the thing that they want. You don't just create more by pretending that there's more.
Well, and I think that what perfectly illustrates your point is how this starts. Let's say you get paid $10. That's where they started with. You get paid, not with what you created, what you produced, what value you added. It's, you just get paid $10. $10 just appears. And it's like, okay, well, if I just got paid $10 and there's nothing else in the world, like, that's you're starting tabula rasa, blank slate. You get paid $10, and then you use that $10 to buy lunch from a street vendor. The street vendor's like, "What the heck is this $10 bill? I don't want this. I made food here. I want something that means something." You don't just get paid $10. You produce something of value, and then you get a token that represents the value you've created, either through services or products or production or something like that. So yeah, to illustrate that point, they just make this assumption of you just introduce money into an economy, and then it gets spent over and over. And it's like, no. People work and produce things of value, and then that value gets exchanged through and through. So at best, their example isn't about this stupid $10. The value that's created it's more about the ripple effect of when people are productive and they can exchange things, the exchanged value can sort of ripple throughout the economy, and productive people can exchange goods and services that they don't have access to before. And so, your act of growing $10 worth of tomatoes has given that $10 of value has been added to the sum of the economy.
Yes.
Not this $50 worth of economic value has been added. The total economy has grown by $10 because you have traded effort and sweat of your own into, and then translated that into economic value. And so, again, they almost kind of get the idea a little bit, but they make it into this stupid equation about how if it's used this $10 bill gets used 5 times, then it's $50. Like, no. When you initially produced the service, you translated basically your own human energy, human intellect, whatever you did to produce that value. You translated that into something that was not in the economy, into growing the entire pot of the economy, which is why free market exchange is not a finite, the rich taking from the poor, or someone making money means someone else doesn't have it. It's why it's not a zero-sum game like that. When you have a free market, people can be ingenuitive and they use their own sort of unlimited resource of their own innovation and or effort. And that's the renewable resource that drives the economy up and makes it expand. And so that when the rich are getting richer in a free market society, the poor are getting richer too, and the middle class is shrinking because more of them are moving into the upper class.
Yeah, and that's what this person fundamentally misunderstands. It's not that $10 created by being exchanged created $50 of economic value. $50 of economic value already existed before those $10 were exchanged. Now they're just determining what is going to be traded where. And so then that begs the question, how do you create $51 of economic value? You produce more. Well, how do you produce more if if you can't invest in it? Well, that's where capital comes in, right? You got to have capital to buy yourself time to be able to produce more and more and more and more. And that's where people that have saved up money, these rich people that have hoarded the wealth, that invest in companies, whether it's through the stock market or through literally, your grandfather gives you a $10,000 loan to go open up an ice cream shop. All that capital has to be, you have to tend your wheat as you eat your daily bread, right? And so that's what rich people do. That's the function they serve in society, is that they say, hey, I want to invest in this. I'll give you money so that you can get up and start it, because I believe that if I give you $10, that you will start creating $15 worth of value every single year, or whatever amount of return it's going to be. And so that's the only way that $50 of economic value actually grows. It's not by spending money, right? It's not just by, it's like if you keep spending it, spend yourself to make money. It's not how it works. It's not magic. There's a really logical cause and effect behind all of this. And that's why waste is such a bad thing, right? Like if that $50 worth of economic value that's been produced, if it goes to waste, gets thrown in the garbage or whatever, like that's a tragedy, right? Like that means that that means that the total amount of economic value has shrunk, the pie has shrunk, and that there's less for everything to go around. Whereas, by investing in things, by using it efficiently, making sure that the people that, produced it are in charge of it, that ensures that, that $50 worth of economic value not only stays the same, but it grows, and that there's more for everyone. And that's why, in the past 40 years, over 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty. It's because there is more stuff to go around, and that's the only way that things get better.
Agreed.
All right, we've got our next one. We've got a not so cringe post by a guy named Nicholas Weaver. I'll read that, and I'll read the actual cringe post. So he writes, the CDC was supposed to have spent the last 2 decades preparing for the specific scenario of, quote, what if someone resurrects smallpox and releases it as a bioweapon, unquote. Now, when faced with a virus that is literally story mode smallpox, they fail, amazingly. For monkeypox, there are vaccines that work, the smallpox vaccines, treatments that worked, designed for smallpox, techniques that work, contact tracing as if it was smallpox. It is not virulent, and they have failed completely and utterly to prevent this growing. So, I don't necessarily know Nicholas Weaver's political leanings, but I mean, spot on, right? It's like that's the whole point of the CDC, is to prevent diseases. And then this brilliant person replies, this is the result of chronic underfunding of the CDC. So, back to our plumber analogy from the very first post. We've paid them $50,000, and they've given us a toilet that doesn't work, and they've gone 5 years over budget in time wise. And then someone comes and says, well, you just didn't pay the guy enough. That's the whole problem. That's why you don't have a working toilet. it's and this is really, I had to make sure this wasn't a joke. It's not. This guy really believes it. It's the classic joke of the only business or the only entity that can fail and get paid more to do what they were already failing at doing is the government. So you and I both agree that like we don't really want big national things like the CDC mandating and managing health and how things are taken care of. But if we're going to pay them, at least, do a good job. And they have done a terrible job, and it's not for a lack of billions of dollars of funding, right? I think they've got like 160,000 employees or something crazy like that. There's a lot of people that work at the CDC, and they get billions of dollars in funding each year, and they can get even more from that depending on what kind of emergencies happen. And it's just nuts. It's like, monkeypox or whatever. I think it's killed. It's killed like less than 100 people worldwide. I think maybe 2 in the United States. And there's a very clear vector of transmission, let's say, for that. So the fact that this billions of dollar organization can't mobilize and figure out how to handle it is just, I think it's a damning indictment of the effectiveness of these people using our tax dollars.
Careful with those swear words.
Oh yes,
there,
yes.
But
I'm
yeah. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's the proper use and all by all means. Unfortunately, I think Nicholas Weaver, based on scanning his profile, probably thinks that it is the result of chronic underfunding or something, because he retweeted something about the big lie GOPers. So he's on the January 6th brain rot or whatever. The funny thing, this strikes me as I've got my 5th booster, and I'm at home. I've been at home this whole time, but I got COVID. But thank goodness I have all those. Think about how much worse it would have been if I hadn't been, quintuple vaxxed. And you can always say it's the result of underfunding of the CDC, or it's always the underfunding of whatever, it is. And you think about the absolute payday of big pharma and the CDC deals working out with, this, nearly fascist, if not actually fascist, rollout of vaccines and government employee mandates, as well as private sector mandates for a while, or mandates that you had to get the vaccine to travel certain ways, certain places. You think about all the money exchanged from there, and you think about the CDC's role in it, and it's hard to think that even if it's hard to think that the CDC isn't getting some kind of sketchy funds from that are not reported. And as you point out, even if that isn't the case, they are not chronically underfunded. They get so much. And then if they are, and let's address, I don't think they are underfunded. I think their reported numbers show that they aren't. And I think that there's, absolute insane levels of cash flow between them and big pharma. But let's say they're chronically underfunded. Maybe, just maybe, it shouldn't be up to one organization for this sort of thing, and there either needs to be one big organization that can handle something like that that's privately run, or you need to have a bunch of broken up sort of smaller municipalities that can tackle these things more locally and decentralized. Because the way that diseases work, obviously you need levels of communication, but they start out somewhere and then they move to other places. And so if you can lock down, even from sort of the government framework, if you can lock down the area where it starts, then it prevents the spread. And big bloated government organizations are terrible at doing that. I mean, you think about, compare this to like 9/11, where the hijacking, those terrorists and their plans were known by different pieces of the FBI and I believe the CIA. I'm not sure. And it was just one miscommunicated mess of bloated bureaucracy of trying to communicate. Well, I don't know who has clearance to hear what, and so they didn't piece it together, and then the attack happened, and it was just ineptitude of big government bureaucracy. And so it's like, okay, so we have this, disease that's not fatal, that's not a big deal, and you have a CDC that's supposed to be able to manage all over the country, and it's not able to do it even in this case. You'd think that maybe the answer is to at least empower smaller localities for things like this instead of having a big overarching mucked up bureaucracy. Of course, I don't think that the government is best suited to handle that, but if you're going to do it, maybe do it on more of a federalism level. If that's one of those abilities that absolutely must be done by the government, which I think is stupid to say. But if that's the result, if the CDC truly is chronically underfunded, well, then you need to, if it was a business, it would need to adapt. It would either need to scale back its services, it would need to scale back its aim, its goal, its what it can do, or it would try to find new business models to make do with fewer resources. And so maybe it needs an approach like that, again, decentralization or other.
Yeah, and that's the inherent issue with any sort of government agency or program or institution, is that mindset of, oh, we're underfunded, that must mean we need to change our operating strategy. That's not even part of the calculus. It's, oh, well, how do we get more money? How do we prove our value so that we get to take money from some other organization, or how do we get some sort of legislation to raise funding for us through, and so that leads to crazy bad things that happen, ranging from the whole COVID-19 response to justify their existence to Waco, right? The ATF trying to justify its existence by having this newspaper cover level event happen, and we'd all be a lot better off if they thought like a normal business would, right? It would prevent a lot of evil and bad outcomes.
Yeah.
All right. For our last one, we've got our old buddy, RR, Robert Reich, and he tweets out minimum wage in 2009, was $7.25 all the way up to 2022. It's still $7.25. If wages had kept pace with productivity gains since 1968, the minimum wage would be $24 an hour. And then one of our favorites, Robert P. Murphy, a great economist, tweeted back, "Are you suggesting that there are lots of workers right now who produce $24 an hour for their employers but only get paid minimum wage? Don't you have any connections with employers to point out the huge opportunity?" And then this genius tweeted back at Robert Murphy, "A Big Mac meal costs $11.49 in Canadian. This means that the average McDonald's worker needs to sell 3 Big Mac meals an hour to be worth $30 an hour, or $24 USD. Currently, minimum wage here is $15.65. That means they need to sell 1.36 Big Macs per hour." And then he continues on. "Now, I have never worked at a McDonald's, but let's say there's 10 people on shift. Let's say it's a 24-hour location. That's $3,765 a day, or 326 Big Macs. I'm fairly sure that's doable, especially since that revenue is split across the hundreds of other items and combos. So in short, yes, $24 an hour is a viable minimum wage. Just sell a couple extra Big Macs. Hashtag eat the rich." Oh my goodness. Where did this guy learn math? Not from any sort of homeschool program I've ever seen. The thing that strikes me about this is the people that have never, ever run a business or been responsible for making sure reality, is kept away from the door to destroy, you or your family. Like, those are the type of people that tweet these things out. It's like, okay, how did you calculate that it needed to be, 1.36 Big Macs per hour? It's like, are you also factoring in, like, is the McDonald's worker literally the person that's also raising the cow, feeding the cow, killing the cow, processing the cow, driving the cow all the way to the McDonald's, and then going and becoming a baker and baking the buns, and then also going to a dairy and making the cheese, and then raising the lettuce? It's like, no single McDonald's worker does all of that. And that is all of the value that is currently wrapped up into, the $11.49 Canadian Big Mac meal, right? Like the worker's portion of that $11.50 for the Big Mac meal is maybe $1, maybe $2. Like, the rest of it is overhead for the restaurant. It's overhead for all of the different administration that manages how money gets placed. It's overhead for all of the different, feed for the cows, all that stuff. And so, and then we tweeted back at this guy. I tweeted back through our account. It's just like, okay, at what point, like, let's say all that is true, right? Like, they make all this profit. It's great. Like, now do the calculus of, like, that they would need to get rid of all their profits, and all of the profits that they make go to their employees. Like, how much do you think you could raise their salary by? Because we all agree, this guy's at least coming from the standpoint that they need to make a profit. And it's like, well, if you do that calculus, spread out $8.5 billion in profit annually over their 2.2 million employees, it turns out that you could only pay each employee $1.87 more per hour. Very far short of the $24 an hour that he's looking for.
Yeah, I mean, And the funny thing is, you listed out all those things for the Big Mac, and you didn't even talk about the rest of the meal, all of the supplies that it takes to ship it in, and the building maintenance and the equipment that they use to cook the burgers. And you think about all of these things, and I don't know. And then these people get mad when employees get replaced with kiosks and digital,
He brought that
workers.
point up
And
later. Yeah.
yeah, it's like they don't understand that there are trade-off and costs, and so raising a minimum wage like that means that your value then shifts, because there are certain things that do, you pay for 24 hours, 24 hour or $24 an hour for an employee for so many hours before it just becomes like, this would have been cheaper to invest in a kiosk that will last me much longer than this employee will probably work here anyway. Yeah, the calculation is totally whack. It's totally off, and none of that even gets into the philosophical reality that no one should even be forcing you to pay a certain amount if you want to make a voluntary agreement with another person. It's like, how far does this minimum wage law need to go? Like, if I want to hire a neighbor kid to paint my fence, do I have to hold him to that $24 an hour Robert Reich wants? What if it's like a little kid who I don't need my fence painted, but I want to teach him a lesson about work and the value of earning money for work. Do I still have to pay that 24, even though the fence doesn't need the paint and it's not really going to look that good and it's not a hard, like, how far does this go? Because they would probably say, well, obviously that wouldn't be a thing. That wouldn't be, but why not? Because in terms of the principle of the thing, you don't get to arbitrarily determine these kinds of metrics of who has to pay whom what. Does that extend into contract work? Well, why is that not an exception? And it is if I do it with like a family friend, or, there's so many of these exceptions, but it all comes down to the fundamental moral principle that no one has the right to tell you that you have to pay someone something for a job if that person agrees to a different price point. If you two voluntarily come to an agreement to do something, then that's it. That's your obligation. It's the agreement that you made with another person. It's the meme about, the myth of consensual sex. And it's like, I consent one person, I consent the other person. And then I don't, isn't there someone you forgot to ask? And it's usually Jesus. That was the original one. And, but it's like the government, it's like, being paid, for $10 for this job, I consent, I don't, the government, isn't there someone you forgot to ask? But again, the best, philosophical foundation and principle that these people would have to fall back on is we live in a society and the social contract, and which is all nonsense rubbish that, of course, it is very anti-consent in its in its founding.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so sure, let's grant the premise that you deserve $24 an hour. Like now scale that up to like a business owner, right? Like a business owner that voluntarily wants to create a burger stand or whatever, and all the work that goes into it, figuring out what machines to use, figuring out how to hire employees, figuring out how to get the supply chain going and all that stuff. And like in the beginning, you have no customers. So how are you going to get paid $24 an hour as a business owner if you have no customers? And the answer is that the government's okay with business owners shouldering the risk. They're okay with them taking all that risk, and then they're more than fine to start blaming them after they start actually eking out any sort of profit, and hopefully profit to make up for the years that they didn't take any salary. Like, people don't realize, like, most businesses don't turn any sort of profit to pay themselves for at least 3 years after they are started. And so, like, take that reality, right? Like, that's the reality of, like, you will get paid less than what you produce. Like, that's just a fact of the matter. If you are getting paid more than you produce, it's either because of corruption or you are, successfully gaming the system in some way, and eventually you will not be able to do that for much longer because it's unsustainable. And so it's like, I think everyone should operate within that reality, because a business owner voluntarily takes on that burden, takes on that risk in hopes of a better future. Why is that right not also applied to? Why is the right that a business owner has to take on that and invest in themselves not also applied to a normal worker, that might want to intern at a prestigious place, or might, like you were saying, might want to just learn how to use tools to paint a fence or work on HVAC equipment or whatever? It's like the minimum wage is a barrier to those people being able to invest in themselves. And you and I believe that they should have the same rights as business owners.
Yeah, and the last thing that I will add is that sometimes people then say, and I've seen this from Josh Hawley. I think we even had this as the cringe post once
Yep.
about only raise the minimum wage for big businesses. And it's funny because these are also people who disagree with the idea of a graduated income tax, but that's all you're really doing, right? You're taxing a certain level of earning or size or whatever level of success. It's discriminatory towards businesses that need to hire more employees, that even if they're, you know, a smaller business, or it discourages revenue growth, like one way or the other, or both. And then the other aspect of it, of course, is that if you create this two-tiered system, well, if there are two jobs that are essentially the same, like a store clerk, and one is for a big company like Walmart, but they're required to pay $24 an hour, and the other's for the local small business that's only required to pay $7.25, that small business is going to get no employees willing to work for them. And then the business dies because they can't hire anyone to man, because no one's going to be willing to do that when they can put in the same effort for another job that is artificially paying higher for the same value and effort put in.
Yep, and that's why you see. I mean, there's ads if you stream on Netflix or Amazon or anywhere. You know, Amazon has ads saying. I guess Netflix doesn't have ads yet. They're announced an ad version. But any of these places, you know, Peacock or whatever, like Amazon will have an ad that says, "Hey, we pay $15 an hour," and lo and behold, they're also one of the biggest proponents of pushing a $15 an hour minimum wage because they know that they have the infrastructure to actually pay for that. And even if they didn't have the infrastructure, they're willing to eat it for however long. So that they can put all of their competitors out of business and keep their competitors new from entering the market, right? It's always interesting, you know, these people that don't like big corporations and think they're so greedy, ironically have the same views as some of these corporations. It's so bizarre that everyone has the same perspective. It's almost like their interests are aligned, or not their interests, but the outcomes are going to be the same across all opportunities. I don't have any more on this one unless you do.
Nope, I'm good.
Cool. All right, friends, thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. And like we said at the beginning of the episode, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, send us a DM, leave a comment. We love to hear it. And we'll catch you next time.